Welcome to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Join us as we dive into the world of endurance sports, exploring everything from nutrition to training and how these elements shape your everyday life, both on and off the race course. Hosted by Coach Justin, certified run and triathlon coach and owner of Tabula Rasa Racing, along with Coach Katie, a registered dietitian specializing in sports nutrition and owner of Fuel to Run. We're here to share insights and real-world advice to help you thrive on your journey. Here at the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast is where your journey begins. Welcome, everyone, to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm your host, Coach Justin. I'm here with Coach Katie, and today is part 2 of our series on metabolic efficiency and metabolic flexibility. So the last episode where we introduced this topic, so part 1, was from a nutritional aspect. For this particular episode, we are going to look at this topic through the eyes of training. So how do we achieve metabolic flexibility and efficiency through the training aspect? So I want to thank you guys for joining us. We'll start off with some housekeeping. Please, if you are enjoying the content that is coming out through the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, we greatly appreciate comments and reviews. We were strong believers from day one in no sponsors, no compensation, nothing like that. We weren't going to monetize this podcast. So this is a labor of love, and we do it simply because we love it. And so if you want to support the podcast, please just leave us a review and leave a comment, and it will help bring others to the podcast. So easily find it through the algorithms. And so we thank you for that. We are both active coaches. So if you're looking for something new for 2026, or you're looking just for some help on achieving a new goal or a new fitness performance or whatever it is that you're doing, if you just want to turn over the reins of training plan creation and all you're responsible for is just executing, we hope that you will consider Katie or I as one of your coaches. So if you're interested in learning more about Coach Katie, you can go to fuel2run.com and check out her website. If you're interested in checking me out, you can go to tabularasaracing.com. Both of us have blogs and videos and all kinds of history and stuff loaded on our websites. So feel free to check us out and reach out if you're interested. So let's go ahead, and we're just going to jump right into this episode. So Katie, you want to tell us a little bit on what we're going to do in this episode from looking at it from a training perspective?
Yeah, so if you haven't caught the first episode, that's where we go into a lot of detail about the difference, what is metabolic efficiency, what's metabolic flexibility, and the difference between the two. So you'll want to go back there if you want to kind of get that. And I talked about the diet, nutrition piece of that. So this one's more about the training part. So I will probably maybe layer in some of that nutrition part that we've already talked about into this, but we want to talk about more like what you might be able to do from a training perspective to be more metabolically efficient. And remember, like, metabolic efficiency is just the ability to burn more fat at slightly higher intensities, to be a little bit more efficient at fat burning during exercise. The flexibility piece is kind of the ability to switch back and forth. And so you can be metabolically flexible and be metabolically efficient, but just because somebody's metabolically efficient does not mean that they're flexible, and able to move, be able to switch efficiently back and forth between carb and fat burning. So that's just a little reminder there. So let's kind of let's start with the training for metabolic efficiency, because there's a lot of overlap. Like, there are things you might do for one that you also would benefit you, because they're both very similar in a way. Mm-hmm. You're just slightly different. So let's talk first about, the efficiency piece. And I think the first thing, and we can dive into this a bit, and I want your input too, because now we're talking more about the training.
Yeah.
It's just a lot, like the aerobic volume, just the base building, or when you're doing a lot of those easy and steady state miles, just accumulating miles in volume, and you're not doing a lot of intensity. So that is probably, without even doing any sort of diet modulation, I think there's benefit even just to doing that type of work to being able to become over time more metabolically efficient. I mean, what are your thoughts there? Is that something you kind of agree with or recommend?
Absolutely agree. one thing that I've started paying a little bit close attention to is the new caloric expenditure calculation that is done within Training Peaks. So if you're using Training Peaks as your training platform, if you are a cyclist or a triathlete, and you have a power meter, there is a new algorithm that Training Peaks has implemented where they will parse out the fat expenditure and the caloric expenditure, and they both roll up to total caloric expenditure, or the carb. I'm sorry. So it's the fat and carb, and they break those out to roll up to your total caloric expenditure. So one of the things that I've been experimenting with is at the end of my bike workouts, I take a look at, okay, what is my fat burning rate? So I take the fat calories that are presented in the workout summary and as a ratio to the total calories. And so, like, for instance, today I did my long ride on the trainer. I did a tempo intervals. So they were 4 by 20 minutes at zone 3 with a 10-minute zone 2, quote unquote, recovery between efforts. And I took a look at what was my fat utilization for that workout. And I was about 32%. But if I take that same workout, if I take a similar workout and move it outdoors where I may be pushing a little bit higher power, my heart rate is higher, then that efficiency rate drops down into, let's say, I've seen it to where it's like 80-20, where 20% of my total calories came from the fat burning part. So I am finding that in order to increase that fat burning rate, my intensity has to remain lower. So I really have to focus on controlling that effort, keeping it into zone 2. I do see some benefits in allowing it to creep into zone 3, but it really starts to break down when you go beyond that threshold and you start tapping into zone 4s and zone 5s, which is typically like your threshold and your anaerobic zones. It really then eats away at that, and it shoots up that carbohydrate part of the calculation and brings that ratio down. So it's something that I've been playing with. I am by no means setting my training plan to increase that efficiency rate. It's just it's just an insight that I'm gaining now. I'm not using it as a training implementation. It's just another piece of the puzzle that I'm looking at. But I am kind of curious now, as we're approaching wintertime now, it's in December, on like how I'm going to approach my training if I want to increase my metabolic efficiency and my flexibility. How long do I have to keep my sessions in zone 2, or what's the sacrifice? Because if I want to increase FTP or if I want to increase power, then I have to be willing to sacrifice that metabolic efficiency. So
yeah, I think that's a good point.
You can't have your cake and eat it too. So we can't get stronger and faster and become more metabolically efficient at the same time, because the tools that you have to implement, the tools that you have to use to bring about that adaptation, they go against each other. So
they do. Yeah, they do. I think that's the hard part, is that, you hear about people who are, maybe following some sort of that really zone 2 training, trying to increase metabolic efficiency, but also just be a little bit faster, like, kind of, okay, at that heart rate, I'm going slightly faster. I'm maybe able to burn more fat, that kind of thing. It just takes time. It's often, months sometimes to be doing that sort of training of lots of aerobic volume and not very high intensity. And it is a trade-off, I think, like if you're training for a race, like especially a race that's maybe not a super long distance a race, like a Ironman or something, like you're doing a sprint triathlon or a 5K, you're not going to have the best race trying to just do that. You have to add some sort of, if you want to go fast. So it does take time. I think that sometimes it's just hard, because you may have to decide, do you want to dedicate several months to this if you really want to work on it? And there's a bit of patience involved in it. And I think that's hard for people who kind of want more to be training for races and more instant gratification of like,
It's me.
Like, yeah, you might have to take a break from racing for a little bit and just work on this. And I think there's like one thing for me, like I've been running for a long time. I've had a lot of time to work on this. Throughout my time, I've had lots of aerobic volume, and then obviously doing races. So I feel like, yeah, maybe I could still benefit from a period of time of making this even better. But, if you're new to running and you really want to improve, probably, spending some time here would be great, but you just have to realize that you're not going to maybe be also able to perform right away at a very high level. It takes time and persistence, and that's sort of the beauty of it too, because it teaches us to be patient. But it's not like you just do like 2 weeks of high aerobic volume and you're like going to be there. This is like a long-term strategy, right? I don't know. I can't give you like a time frame, but it's, dedicating 2, 3, even 6 months of the year to sort of really work on this. It could be beneficial in the long run, but it's not satisfying because you're not racing fast.
The one thing that I am kind of cautious about, and it's sometimes because new athletes can get overwhelmed with the amount of information that they're presented all the time.
Definitely.
That it's overwhelming on social media. It's like, I have to be in zone 2. I can't be in the gray zone. I can't be in zone 3. I need to worry about my cadence. I need to do this and that. And then they start to see these things called metabolic efficiency and metabolic flexibility. And so now they're like, oh, well, this is another thing that I have to incorporate.
Really?
I would really caution a new athlete from trying this approach. You may not have the foundation necessary to support this endeavor. So if I were you and if I were your coach, I would say, look, metabolic efficiency and flexibility is great. There is a time and place for it. I don't think that you might be at that place yet. So let's worry about building a foundation first, and let's get a couple years of training under our belts, because what we see is we want this metabolic efficiency and flexibility comes at lower heart rates, right?
Yep.
So when a new athlete goes out, and these are especially true for new runners, I see this so much where a runner goes out and then they come back and they post. It's like, my heart rate is like, 180, 190, and I can't figure out like what's going on. And a lot of times it's, hey, you are a new runner. Your body is still trying to figure out what's going on. So you've now
in order to stay in that zone 2, you have to walk. And then it's like, well,
and
that's not going to get you any better at running. You can't just keep walking. It's not going to get you there.
So you're just not at this place where even heart rate zone training is pertinent or is a relevant training tool for you. I urge these athletes, let's just run by feel. I'm not setting a plan by heart rate. I don't need you to be in zone 2, whatever, because we don't even know what zone 2 is at this stage. So let's get to the point where we can find these zones. And that doesn't come until much later into your journey where, we're able to get our heart rate into particular zones at different intensities. So, right off the bat, you start running and your heart rate shoots up to like 170, 180, 190 beats per minute. Most of the time, this is the result of your body being proactive. It knows now that, over the past several months of you running, that's where your heart rate has gone. And so if you start running and your heart rate immediately goes up to there, it's your body's response to the history that it has learned up till now. It says, I know what we're doing now. So I'm going to supply all the blood flow that's going to be needed. And so the heart rate spikes up and stays elevated. It's not until you learn to run in different effort zones that the body starts to learn and adapt to it, so where you can find and be in these different heart rate zones, whether it's zone 2, 3, and 4. So in order to really optimize the efficiency of metabolic efficiency and flexibility, you have to be able to get into these zones. So if you're not able to do that, this is just something that you may have to come back to later when you gain a little bit more experience and you get further along in your journey.
Yeah.
So That's
I
what
agree.
I
I
would
think,
caution
yeah, I think
new
it's,
athletes for.
yeah, not something you jump into initially. You do have to kind of have that basic, level of training under, foundational training under you to be able to do this. And then also, I think, if people have kind of heard of that like 80-20 rule and things like
Hmm.
that. So it's not like once you get going with it, I think it does help to maybe have a period of time you're just sort of focusing on the volume and the maybe, easy running and just kind of building up your aerobic base. But at a certain point, you can add it. It doesn't really detrimental to add in some faster running as
Hmm.
long as you're doing some of your running at this sort of aerobic pace. And so a lot of elite runners do this where they're a lot of their running because they're running so much. I mean, this isn't an expectation for most people. They may not be exactly 80-20, but they're doing 120 miles a week. Well, in order to do that sort of volume, the majority or a large portion is going to be at this sort of steady state, easy miles. And then, they're doing some certain very key workouts where it's fast, right? So it's all in the training plan. I mean, you still benefit from that. But I do think sometimes if somebody really wants to work on this and they feel like, wow, I just feel like for my zone 2, my heart rate's still a little high. Like I'm just crawling along. It's maybe say take some time to work on that and improving the aerobic base and kind of getting to the point where you can run slightly faster at a lower heart rate, and then being able to work from there because then everything else is a little bit easier. But you don't necessarily have to do that. I mean, I think sometimes it's just a matter of having most of your training be there, and then you can still add in some faster stuff, but you may not. Yeah, I mean, and like you said, this is only coming later when you're able to facilitate this and actually do it, and it's not like you're walking to stay in your zone 2. If you're finding that
Yeah.
a majority of your run is actually a walk to be able to stay in what you think is zone 2 or whatever is calculated based off your age, then it's not going to benefit you to do this because you're not learning how to be a better runner. You're just maybe you're improving metabolic efficiency because you're in that zone 2, but you're not actually becoming a better runner because you're not actually running at that point. So you have to be able to get to that point where you're running comfortably and able to continue running at that sort of pace. So yeah, so I think that's the first one I want to mention is like, cause that's probably the easy way. Not easy because it's not
Hmm.
easy, but in like
Right.
the basic way to do it without even making any changes to your diet. Now, if you do that and maybe you go lower carb or you do like a low carb cyclical approach and you're doing that sort of training, it might even benefit you even more. So like we've talked about in our first episode with the low carb piece. So, and I think that just a reminder, like the benefits of that, we talked about mitochondrial density and mitochondria in the first episode, and that's helping you burn more fat. So the more of this aerobic training, it increases that mitochondrial density. Maybe our ability to deliver oxygen to our muscles, that improves a little bit, and just the lower costs, you just get more efficient at running essentially.
Hmm.
So those are some of the benefits to that. So what about like doing more of like the tempo or steady state runs? Like, is there a benefit to? So this would be like a lot of people kind of describe this as like maybe marathon pace plus 30 seconds, so, but it's like, sometimes it's like how even defining what this means is challenging, right? Because it may be a little different for people, but sort of that steady state, almost like it would almost be like that zone 3, maybe
Yep.
zone 3, like gray zone. And actually a lot of this zone is kind of poo-pooed by a lot of people, like you don't want to be in the gray zone, but actually I think there can be benefit sometimes being in this zone 3 zone, like, or
Absolutely.
training zone.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to spend all your time there, but I do think it is going to be beneficial for that fat, potentially like improving fat oxidation. What are your thoughts?
Yeah.
Like,
The way that I characterize zone 3 is I think of it as half Ironman
uh,
effort. So,
uh-huh.
typically
That's a good one.
if you're doing an Ironman, you're going to be mostly in zone 2. If you're doing anything between a sprint and an Olympic, you're really going to be at threshold. So that's more of like zone 4, zone 5. So really that half Ironman distance is really that tempo effort, that zone 3. I agree. This zone is poo-pooed on a lot, and I don't like it. It really kind of irritates me, and it kind of makes me go a little bit bonkers over it because I find great benefit in being in that zone. It's still an aerobic zone, and it's still relevant. So we're still building aerobic capacity. So
Right.
the reason that it gets such a bad rap is because it's neither low intensity nor is it high intensity. So if you find yourself maybe not seeing significant gains in fitness, then you very well should question, how much time am I spending in zone 3? Because the more time you spend in zone 3, the less time that you have available to spend at some of those higher efforts. And the more time you spend at higher efforts, the more time you need to spend in the lower efforts in order to balance out the training stress over a particular training cycle. So that's why this zone 3 kind of gets crapped on all the time, is because you're neither going hard nor going easy. It's like, this is just like setting cruise control in your car. You're not increasing, and your speed isn't increasing, and your speed isn't decreasing. You're just going. And so, I spend a lot of my time in zone 3. And right now it's because that I'm training for a half Ironman. So this is a very relevant training zone. I don't spend all of my time in it, but I do believe in tempo efforts on the bike. I do believe in tempo runs. Those are still greatly beneficial. So
I agree. I
it's
think
super frustrating.
it's frustrating. I think
where
what people get in trouble with it is that it has to be part of the training plan, and those tempo runs are kind of strategic. I think where people get in trouble is when they're trying to do it easy. Their easy days or their recovery days are always in zone 3, so they're never actually recovering because they're always in this sort of gray zone. And so I think that's where it's kind of gotten the bad reputation. Because my opinion, there should be some higher training in higher zones. But I do think for especially an endurance athlete doing something like marathon and beyond, to be able to do these tempo workouts in this, because that is where I think even for a marathon, there's a substantial amount of time in sort of that zone 3. So you have to kind of, or maybe slightly higher zone, but to get comfortable in that zone, you have to sort of train your body to be comfortable there. The problem is, I think, when people do now every day they're doing zone 3. And like you said, they're never really able to go into the higher because they're tired. They can't hit some of those higher zones because they're not recovered. So I really believe the easy days, the recovery days should be easy. That should be, if you can sort of have an idea of where your zone 2 is, really trying to hit that, especially on the recovery days, and not go into the, that's in my training. I don't pay a lot to heart rate. I don't pay actually a whole lot of attention to it, except on my easy days. When I am marathon training on my recovery days, I actually do look at it, because I sometimes will feel okay, surprisingly, but I don't want to be like, oh, I feel pretty good, I'm going to push it. I'm actually I cannot go, my goal today is not to go above 150 or whatever it is. And I will look at my watch and monitor that, because sometimes it will start to creep up, and I'm like, I don't want to overdo it, because I know tomorrow I have to do a hard workout, and I want to be 100% or as close to 100% for that workout as I can. So the only time I ever look at heart rate is on my recovery days, just to make sure I'm not going into zone 3 or kind of going beyond that easy zone. And I mean, usually I can feel it out with effort-based training. I'm very good at that, but that's the only time I actually kind of pay attention, just to check myself, to be honest. So I'm not a big, I generally don't actually, when I'm doing my intervals and my workouts, I'm not actually literally looking at my heart rate very often, because I just don't. I go by effort and kind of by pace, and that's it. But I think, that would be what I would recommend. So I think, I think the moral of the story for that is that we don't be afraid of zone 3, of the steady state runs, that actually there is some improvement for improving fat oxidation and just getting kind of comfortable at that a little bit faster of a pace. But you just do it strategically. Don't do it on your easy recovery days. And it is not the bad zone. Don't be afraid of that. I don't even know if I would call it the gray zone. So I think we both agree there. I hope that all makes sense to people. So what about fast? So we have talked, this is where we talked about in the first episode about fasted or low glycogen runs. So either, so low glycogen run would be training, depleting your glycogen stores, and then going into another run, having low glycogen. stores or just fasted on a run. So do you ever recommend this? I mean, I'm curious, this is something you ever recommend or have done for yourself or with your athletes?
I can say before I started working with you, every workout was done fasted. And so I probably saw hindered my athletic progression significantly by this approach. When I'm working with athletes, it depends on where we are in the training plan. I will say, hey, do this fasted. Most of the time, I don't tell them to do it fasted. I tell them to do it with a preload feeding. I tend to go the other direction. It's like, with this particular workout, I want you to have eaten something before this training session. So typically I leave it up to the athlete on how they feel, if they'd like doing fasted workouts. But, if I want to, if I'm giving them a workout for a specific adaptation, then I will say, hey, do this fed or do this feeding.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But, again, it really kind of depends on where we are in the plan. Typically, it's not in the early stages of a training plan where volume is a little bit lower.
Right.
I'm not too concerned about that, because that tends to be a great time to focus on, this metabolic efficiency when we're doing a lot of base training. We're kind of like setting a foundation. We're not doing a whole lot of specificity. So there's no like race pace efforts or anything like that. We're laying the foundation. So it's a great time to really kind of, focus in, do a little bit of work for it. But I can honestly say that I've never developed a training plan for an athlete where we've specifically said, we're going to work on metabolic efficiency and metabolic flexibility. It's just not something that has ever been a significant focus of attention.
Honestly, I think this is, if I were to put this somewhere, I would say this is advanced. This is not, these are not things, I mean, obviously the first two we talked about are just kind of part of training plans that aren't, but these types of fasted runs are an advanced strategy. This isn't for somebody who's starting out running for the first time and maybe they've only got a couple years of running under their belts. It isn't really for most people. I say this would be for somebody who's maybe got a lot of the training, like they've been training for quite a while. They're wanting to kind of find those little things that will tweak and help them maybe be slightly faster, because this isn't going to, even being more metabolically efficient or flexible, it honestly isn't going to get you, huge advancements in your time. Some of this is just helping you to be a little bit more able to utilize fat. May help like that sort of more elite runner or runner who's been running for a long time and just trying to get slightly better, something that will help them be slightly more efficient. It might get you a minute or two, maybe, and I can't say exactly how much time this helps, but this is an advanced strategy. So I really want to caution most people, like we talked a little bit on the nutrition. First part we did was, the potential risks of especially the fasted runs. It has some risks, so it needs to be strategic and it needs to be done with somebody who's been training for a while and has a pretty good understanding of their body and how these might affect their, how they're feeling. And so they're able to be like, okay, this is working or not, or I'm going to implement this once in a while. But I do not think that it needs to be something that most of my athletes, I wouldn't do this with unless I had somebody who's really been training for a long time and is like an advanced athlete is what I would call it. So I would not encourage people to do this.
I would almost consider this to be an off-season kind of focus.
Yeah, maybe off-season.
Definitely
maybe,
something like that.
But not something I would... You can try it, but just like we're saying here, like maybe just doing like a morning easy run before you eat breakfast. So your easy run, if it's less than 60 minutes, try doing that fasted. That would be a starting point. If you're doing a long run, I really don't recommend people do much longer than 90, maybe 2 hours, 90 minutes, maybe 120 minutes of fasted. And then if they have to keep going to then fuel a little bit after that point, it is like, yeah, those would be maybe where it might be okay once in a while. But
because
so if you want to start with it, maybe easy runs, and that would be...
They're hard to recover from, So, if you go into a fasted run and it's, 120 minutes, you're getting really close to just the glycogen depletion.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're a consistent athlete, then you have to caution yourself as like, what is going to be the impact of tomorrow's session? So
Exactly.
you really have to pay close attention to the sequencing of your workouts and not just look at, Monday through Sunday. You have to look at Monday to Monday. So, because sometimes, and I stumble across this as well, really, when I'm looking at a training plan and I just see a week, and then I really kind of don't look beyond that. So it's like you're looking at just the 7 days, and then it's like you look at those with blinders on. But really, if you're looking at something like this, you have to remove those blinders, because whatever you do on Sunday, you have the Monday that follows right behind it. So if your long run is on Sunday and we do that fasted, even though, we may not generate, a 2-week training plan, you still have to consider, okay, what adjustments do I need to make to Monday's session because we did the long run fasted on Sunday? So it takes a lot more caution and attention to detail if you're going to be doing something like this. That's one caution that I would.
Yeah, it's not something you just put in, and you do want to be mindful about, how you're recovering after you do these sessions. Like, then it may be really important to get the carbs in after and right away, because you've sort of done the work, but then you want to make sure you're replacing the glycogen as quickly as possible, because it is hard when you really depleted it to really restore glycogen. And so that could affect for sure your workout the next day. Plus it's stressful in the body, and it can decrease immune function. So, you want to be like trying to do this and then get sick. So absolutely, just very strategic. That's why I kind of call it more of an advanced strategy. But yeah, like I said, maybe trying some easy, runs less than 60 minutes fasted if you want. But I don't know if there's a ton of benefit to that, but it could be like a starting point. The other one I have here.
Follow those workouts with like something that's like strength training. So if you do your long run on Sunday that's fasted, consider adding in a Monday strength session that is upper body focused. Since those are low heart rate events, you're really engaging on the muscular and skeletal system more so than like your aerobic system. So it might allow you to still be consistent and still train in a progression while practicing these fasted runs without sacrificing performance of future runs. So just something to consider with those sequencing.
Yeah, absolutely. The other one would be the like long runs with like a progression at the end. So this would be like where you wouldn't be doing these fasted. This is just a type of workout. So it'd be like a 20 miles or maybe 16 to 18 if you're marathon training, it would be like the last 8 or 12 would be or progressing up to marathon pace, or the last 8 would be marathon pace or something like that. So you're starting out slow, you're progressing faster and faster, and at the end you're really pushing the pace. And even when you're fueling, this can be a great strategy because, as you're sort of pushing higher intensities at the end, you're really kind of pushing your body to be able to be a little bit uncomfortable, first of all, after you're already a little bit tired, which helps towards the race, but it also has some benefits for, being able to push your ability to maybe burn fat or just be able to even utilize carbs a little bit better at those higher intensities when you're already tired. So that would be another strategy. I don't know if you I do. This is the one thing I hate doing. I do not love these, but that's the thing though. I'm like, maybe that's because I always struggle in my marathon the last several, like as I'm hanging on, and then most people are. It's hard in the marathon. You're kind of hanging on the last 10K. But I'm like really going to push myself to do more of these like progressive style runs in my next training cycle. So I'm hoping that helps me. And just from that, being purely uncomfortable when you're already tired and being able to keep the pace. But there can be some benefit also to being able to be a little bit more metabolically flexible and training those systems of adaptation. So I wanted to add that one in there. Any thoughts?
I think it's an interesting perspective because as intensity increases, your body's ability to consume and absorb nutrients becomes hindered, right? Because the blood is being pushed from the gut to the muscle to supply oxygen and the constriction of the muscle. So if you become more metabolically efficient at burning fat at higher intensities, then you may save yourself some gut issues later on, as you don't need to fuel as much during the exercise. And so you may be able to sustain these progressive efforts because you're more metabolically efficient and your body doesn't have to also try and consume and absorb nutrients to fuel the effort.
Yeah.
But I'm a huge user of progressive workouts. I love them. It's great practice. I use them in all of my athlete training plans. I use them in my personal plan as well. A lot of my runs and bikes are progressive in nature. So whether
you're already training this.
Yeah, whether you're in, you can still use a progressive approach and still be in zone 2. So, if you're like, well, I need, to stay in zone 2, this by effort, right? We're talking RPE only. I'm not talking about, we need to be there based on heart rate or pace or what have you. What I do a lot with my plan is if I give myself a zone 2 workout, whether that be a run or a bike, I may split those up into intervals and do the progression within the zone 2 range. So let's say if my zone 2 pace for a run is anywhere between like a 12-minute mile down to say like 11:30 to 11:10, like my zone 2 range, then, that's what I'll do 5 minutes at the slowest pace that I can within that zone 2. So at that 12-minute pace. And then I'll do the next 5 minutes at a little bit of a faster clip. As long as I don't go above the threshold of that zone 2 where it puts me into zone 3, then I'm still practicing that progression. And I just think it's good practice. If you don't do it, in practice, there's no way that you will be able to observe a progressive or a negative split in the race. So, that's what we want. That's what we're there for. So,
or at least to maintain that effort throughout for like a marathon. A lot of people fail to maintain the pace towards the end. And so even to be able to hang on and maintain your pace, like let's say you're on pace to have a goal race time, it's hard in a marathon to be faster. I mean, it's possible, but to be able to just have that experience in the training that you can hang on. You've done it in your training, and then in a race you're just like, okay, I'm hurting, but I know I've been here before, and you've trained that, and you're just hanging on. And you don't your pace doesn't slow down at the end of it. That's a positive as well, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do mostly. I mean, I'd love to be a faster at the end, but it's not like I've slowed down substantially, but I've noticed that it slows down a little bit those last 10K, just a couple seconds a mile, maybe a little bit more. And I just want to be able to hang on a little longer and be able to maintain the paces a little bit longer towards the end. So anyway, that's what I know. We're running out of time because you have to go.
Yeah,
so let's just talk.
Up against a hard break here pretty soon.
I know.
So.
Yeah. So let's talk one more, I would say, is the strength training piece. So really quickly, people don't think about this so much when it comes to like metabolically efficient, being metabolically efficient or flexible, but just a few things. It does help being more fatigue resistant. So having more strength can help you towards the end, especially when you're at the end of some of those longer runs, be able to maintain pace a little better because you're fatigue resistant. We've talked about how building muscle can reduce glycogen or increase glycogen stores. That could be potentially something. We talked about that in our last episode. And just more power. When we're more powerful, we may have the ability to have, be able to power through our runs better, and it makes us just more efficient, right? And good form later in the race too, which once our form starts to break down, it is much more of an energy cost to us once we start to break down in form, because, all of a sudden your running is wonky and now you're just burning all sorts of energy, and that's going to make you less metabolically efficient. So those are things. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, the one thing that I would add is the reason that I spend so much time with strength training is because I've observed lower heart rates at hard efforts So for instance, I do a lot of big gear work on the bike. And so now what I'm finding is that I'm able to march up hills on the bike and keep my heart rate low rather than having it spike up. And so the more time I can keep my heart rate lower, I know that I am more metabolically efficient. It's when that heart rate starts to spike up is when you start to approach that crossover point where you're burning less fat and you're burning more carbs. So the stronger you are and the easier you can sustain these harder efforts, the more metabolically efficient you're going to be. And you'll be able to push out that flexibility point, that crossover when you stop burning fat and you start burning through carbohydrate. So that's one of the huge benefit that I saw from my own strength training.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of benefits I've seen, but in terms of metabolic efficiency, I think it just made me my stride is more powerful and more efficient, and definitely the fatigue resistance at the end. So I'm not losing my form. I'm able to continue with great form most of the time throughout the run, and therefore I'm not losing energy that way. So that's some big ones. And I think for metabolic efficiency and metabolic flexibility, a lot of these overlap. The only one I just really want to quickly mention, because we've talked about like the tempo, the aerobic running, we've talked about, the fasted runs. The one thing too, I think that would be maybe beneficial more for the metabolic flexibility piece would be those more lactate threshold training. So this is like a little bit higher intensity or a bit higher intensity than tempo, but it's a carb heavy, right? This is where you are kind of going into that crossover concept and you're burning more carb, but this really has to do more with lactate clearance and the ability to utilize even that other substrate that comes from carbohydrate, but to be able to like have our body be more efficiently utilizing and recycling some of that lactate, right? And be able to work on that system, which is almost like, I guess, part of carbohydrate utilization. But the better we're able to, once we start to accumulate lactate, be able to clear it out of our system and reuse it for energy, the better we are too. So that's one to mention too, is just being not only metabolically flexible in terms of fat and carbs, but also thinking of this other substrate that is a product of carbohydrate metabolism, but to be able to, once we have that lactate building up and we're not able to clear it, that can become problematic for us. So being able to clear that faster and really hit that system of lactate threshold training to be able to do that is also a very beneficial type of training. And I would put that kind of in the bucket of metabolic flexibility because it is more related to carb, but very important. So that would be my last, maybe the one thing that differs between efficiency and flexibility in terms of the different training strategies. But that would be the last one I would highly emphasize as a good thing to include, right?
Yeah, in one of our previous episodes, when we talked about the trade-off, should we focus on speed or should we focus on endurance? One of the ways that we talked about how does one become faster, there are two methods in order to do that. You can either run faster or you can delay the degradation of pace. So you just don't slow down as much. Well, if you become more metabolically efficient and your body is able to process the lactate that starts to accumulate, you won't see that degradation in pace. So your body, as your body becomes more efficient at clearing lactate, the lactate is what causes the degradation in pace. It starts to make the effort feel harder. So if you can delay that and your body can become more efficient at clearing that lactate, you should actually see yourself becoming faster in terms of like you're just not slowing down. So your race times can improve just by becoming more efficient at clearing lactate and becoming more metabolically efficient without actually having to learn how to run faster. You just don't slow down as much.
Right. Absolutely. So yeah. So those are the big ones for training. I know you have to run. The one thing I'll say is I have like some pretty extensive notes here that I've taken for this episode just to keep us on track and make sure we hit everything. So what I will probably do is just take these and create more of like a blog post, because I know we have a limit in our show note. I don't know how much we can add into the episode show notes themselves. There's a limit there. So I'll try to complete that. I mean, I have it all here. I just need to kind of make it all make sense into like more of a blog post. So maybe we can also include that, like a link to that in the show notes because I think that would be really helpful for people to maybe be able to go back and go through, a post and more of this information if they want to dig in. And I'll try to include some of the studies and things that I found along the way. But I just want to mention that because it might be worth looking into a little more if you're interested in this topic. So yeah, I know Justin's got to go.
Yeah. Sorry, we've kind of had to keep this episode a little bit shorter. It's a great topic and it's really, really interesting. Maybe one day we'll be able to come back and talk about this in a little bit more in depth when I'm not time compressed right now. But I gotta take the kid to work.
Yeah, that's good.
So,
I got it. Yeah.
But thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. I'm your host, Coach Justin, along with Coach Katie. Thank you guys, and we will come to you again next week. All right. Thank you for listening.
Yeah. Bye.
Right. Bye-bye. That wraps up today's episode of the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Endurance sports have a way of teaching us patience, humility, and resilience, lessons that carry far beyond the workout. Progress in endurance sports doesn't come from shortcuts. It comes from consistency, discipline, and doing the work when it's not glamorous. Wherever you are on your endurance journey, keep trusting the process and honoring the work you put in each day. If today's episode resonated, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone to help on their endurance journey. Don't forget to join the conversation on our social sites to help build and foster a community where we all learn and support one another. We'll be back with more stories and insights from Coach Justin and Katie. Until then, visit the podcast website at theenduranceathletejourney.buzzsprout.com for more episodes from the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast. Have questions or comments about the podcast? Feel free to send us an email at theenduranceathletejourney@gmail.com. For all things coaching, visit Coach Katie at fuel2run.com and Coach Justin at tabularasaracing.com. Again, thank you for listening to the Endurance Athlete Journey podcast, and remember to find joy in the journey.